So I've always been a fan of stories that will leave me emotionally wrecked. There's something that speaks volumes to an author's work if they can leave you in a state of almost numbness through the characters and stories they tell, or in a state of emotional reflection through deep and traumatic topics. And that is why I am such a big fan of the seinen genre of manga. But I found a story that was so jarring, it has taken me almost 3 months to finally figure out how to even talk about this manga on screen and give you guys a video about it. That is, of course, Oyasumi Punpun, or Goodnight Punpun. And today, I'm going to do my best to talk about it with you guys. But first, cue that theme song.
Rambling addiction, yeah, you're hanging out with Lucas. Manga, animator, anything, alright, let's do this. Weekly is the basis, worst generation. Cooking up a feast while he's turning through the pages. Theories that he's making, from shonen to seinen. Locked in, analyzing, using observation. Yeah, observation. Rambling addiction.
Hello, I'm Straw Hat Lucas, and welcome back to another episode of Rambling Addiction, the series where I talk and you listen. Now, as I said, I've spent the last few months since finishing Goodnight Punpun trying to put together my thoughts so I could give the series a proper review, and I'm just going to be real. It is impossible for me to do that. No matter how many times I tried to bullet point out the story or write out exactly what I wanted to talk about the story, I found myself unable to find the words that I really wanted to say about Punpun. So today I've decided to focus on the relationships that Punpun has throughout the series and give my thoughts on them as we progress through the video. So of course, spoilers inbound, and for once I actually do have to give a trigger warning. Goodnight Punpun as a series handles a lot of heavy topics, including domestic abuse, the effects of that on a child, abuse of that child, I'm gonna say, just so that YouTube doesn't take my video down immediately. I think the best place to start is the relationship that Punpun has with his direct family, that being his parents and his uncle. Now, reading through Punpun's childhood was actually very hard for me to do as a child of divorce and a child who went through very similar situations and watching their parents do similar things as what is portrayed in the manga. It was very challenging to get through this. Having an emotional attachment with the story this dark and depressing is never a good sign, but jokes aside, it really is a jarring experience to see such vivid and realistic depictions of these kind of very heavy topics laid out so well. You feel every bit of sadness and anxiety that Punpun's parents fighting give to him. You can also feel for Punpun's father, even though being a drunk and abusive alcoholic, he is still a father who loves his son dearly. And even though he stepped away from Punpun's life with his meeting with Sashi later in the manga, you can really see that he regrets leaving his son behind to stay with his mother. And Punpun's mother is another one of those characters who you really do see not both sides of it, but an understanding to why she is the way she is. She lived a very party-style life before meeting Punpun's father. She became pregnant and immediately started the whole nuclear family side of things and regretted it deeply. And this regret eventually built up towards resentment to Punpun. And as always in these types of toxic households, the fighting that is between the mother and the father and the physical violence between the mother and the father will eventually fall onto the child. And Punpun's mom is straight verbally and physically abusive towards Punpun, and it builds up this really, really tough tension between the two of them. And after a night of drinking, Punpun's father beats his mother so badly that she ends up in the hospital, and Punpun's father ends up leaving when we meet Yuichi, Punpun's uncle and brother to his mother. Now, Yuichi is one of the only solid relationships that Punpun actually has. He does recognize that Punpun is a child without completely treating him like a child. He still allows Punpun to feel those things, but also doesn't speak to him like he is an ignorant kid. He does try to shield Punpun at times from the reality of the situation between his mother and his father, but as time goes on, and Punpun drops his father's last name and takes up the last name of his mother and uncle. Their relationship, it's the only one in the manga, if I'm honest. I'm trying to be as withdrawn and not getting as emotional as I want to with this, because if I do, I don't know if I'll stop. But the relationship between Punpun and his uncle, as I interpreted it, he really was the only adult in Punpun's life that cared for him until we get to another relationship that I'll speak on later. And to say that is kind of messed up, right? Because later, when we are introduced to Yuichi's girlfriend and future wife, Midori, she straight up takes Punpun by force. I don't know how else to say it, and I don't want to say the other word. Once again, YouTube. And when Yuichi goes to a 15, 16-year-old Punpun and tells him, I know what happened. It's all right. I don't blame you. Instead of saying anything about the fact that she forced herself onto a child, you can feel how Punpun took that. He did not take that as a saving grace, as a, oh, thank God my uncle, he's not upset with me for what happened. No, he took it as any abuse victim would, as someone pushing off what actually happened for their own truth. And that is just terrible. Like, let's be real. Punpun went through so much in his childhood and into his adulthood from his mother and father, and then his uncle as well to some regards, which sucks because, as I've been saying, his uncle was kind of his rock, right? His uncle was kind of the person, the one adult that he could legitimately trust in this world. And I felt in that moment that Punpun had no one, truthfully. And I know I'm kind of jumping around, but let me wrap up talking about his parents with his relationship with his mother as she faces her death. After some time has passed and into Punpun's 20s, his mother is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And on her deathbed, she tells Punpun that she is sorry for how she treated him, and then passes away. And he just kind of stares at her for a second. He doesn't really say much. I don't believe he says anything, honestly. And I think it's that silence from Punpun that speaks more volume to the situation and his relationship with his mother than anything else that was depicted between the two of them throughout the series. Because even though this woman is dying, and she's the woman who gave birth to him, he does not really care, right? He's detached from the situation. So let's say that, actually. It's not that Punpun does not care that his mother is passing. He is completely detached from the situation because of the emotional state he has continuously been in since he was 11. Like a lot of people who have suffered from trauma, it is almost like Punpun is stuck in the fight or flight reflex throughout most of the series until the boiling point, right? Before I get into the next big relationship for Punpun I want to focus on, and I think we all know who that is, I have to briefly speak about Mr. Shishido. Mr. Shishido is Ono D's landlord when he moves to the big city in the hunt for Aiko. And I think that, as I said earlier, that like as he was growing up, his uncle was the only kind of stable adult figure that he really had because of their natural bond over that loneliness that both of them felt. I think that Shishido is kind of the only healthy adult that Punpun had, right? Because even though he was his landlord, he employed Punpun, he was always talking him up, talking about how good of a kid he is, and he was really the only person doing that for Punpun. And with what happened to him and being paralyzed for the rest of his life because of a whole misunderstanding at a grocery store, my heart broke for him. I'm not gonna lie. But to see him in Punpun and another character that we will be getting into here in a little bit, kind of having a happier life towards the end of the story, that really meant a lot to me. Especially, like I said, with what happened to Shishido in the grocery store and becoming a paraplegic. My man deserved a happy ending. He was such a good force in Punpun's life, and I just wish that Punpun, you should have listened to him, man. You should have. So, man, this is so hard. I'm still, even though I figured out how I wanted to do this video, I'm still having so much trouble putting into words what I want to say, right? That's okay though, we're in this together, guys. It's time to talk about Aiko. Now, Aiko is the love interest that Punpun has for the entire series, for the most part. Meeting when the first children and Aiko transfers into his school, Punpun immediately falls head over heels for her. But we see from the beginning that their relationship isn't necessarily a healthy one, with Aiko telling Punpun that he has to promise to never break a promise or she will take him out. And of course, after asking Punpun to take her away and run away with her, he cannot keep that promise, and they have a falling out that lasts for 9 years. And over that course of the 9 years, Punpun, and unknowing to us and unknowing to Punpun, both beat themselves up completely about this, feeling that they lost the greatest love of their life. Kind of not letting the love that they had for one another go, even though they had gone two completely separate paths. But one day, as Punpun has decided to get his license, he runs into Aiko again and they strike up a conversation, both immediately lying to each other about how good their lives have been. Aiko saying that she has a successful modeling career, Punpun saying he has a very consistent job, consistent source of income, which we all know is not true. Then they go to a hotel where they almost have sex, and Punpun luckily stops himself while she says no. I had such a sick feeling in my gut during this one part of the encounter. And I'm not gonna lie, this made my gut churn quite a bit because it reminded me of so many stories I'd heard from female friends or what have you over the years. And it just seemed like such a very, very real situation. And from this point on, that is exactly what happens in the relationship between Aiko and Punpun. It gets too real. Aiko eventually confesses that her life is not how she made it appear to Punpun, and she still lives with her very, very abusive mother, who is living off her and forcing her to do manual labor to make an income to take care of her. Punpun then kind of confesses himself to her as well, being a fraud and, telling her the truth. After this, they have sex, and Aiko and Punpun agree to run away together to the place that they had agreed to when they were children. As they go to confront Aiko's mother, her mother shows that she is not actually paraplegic, as she had convinced Aiko that she was, which leads to violence as she tries to murder Aiko. And then this causes Punpun to lash out and strangle Aiko's mother. Punpun believes that he has murdered Aiko's mother, so he and Aiko flee the situation in the mother's car. Over the course of the next few chapters, we see Aiko and Punpun on the run as their relationship starts to fall apart because of the circumstances it is under. Now, do I think that given better circumstances, if they had met naturally and instead of what happened, Aiko just got her stuff and left her mother's or whatever, or they called the cops on her mom or whatever, if it would have turned out differently, I cannot say, because they were both holding on to this idea of the love that they had when they were children for each other, and that tainted the view of the love they had for each other as adults, mixed in with the already abusive situations that both of them were brought up in, makes for a very, very toxic relationship. We see the extreme highs of most toxic relationships in Aiko and Punpun, where they go from being the most complete and in-love couple to straight abuse. And I think this kind of comes to a pinnacle perfectly in the story with what happens next. As they are on the run, Aiko believes Punpun is going to take her out, to unalive her to relieve himself of the burden of caring for her, before Punpun finally convinces her that he does truly love her. And as the audience, I can't tell if he's trying to convince her or himself, and us along with himself, which is just a phenomenal call out to the mangaka, who just absolutely killed it with the writing of both of these characters and the situations that led to these moments. So as Aiko accepts this love that she has for Punpun and the love that he has for her, he falls asleep as Aiko wanders into the night. The next set of events have stayed with me for the past 3 months. I'm going to be showing some panels on screen, and I have to give just one more trigger warning. This is some very real stuff that has to deal with taking one's own life. As Punpun awakes, he wonders where Aiko is, and he calls out to her. And that's when he finds her, hanging, as she is no longer on this world by her own hand. Even noting this out, or even talking about this, has been kind of hard for me, as someone who has had loved ones do this kind of thing before. It was very rough to read and very rough to see Punpun go through. As he sits there holding Aiko's hat, the silence is deafening, even though you are reading. You feel the weight of that moment. And then Punpun, unable to accept the fact that Aiko is gone, says, "Aiko, let's go," and begins to carry her body with him, unable to let go of the journey that they've had. Oh man, it is hitting me again, guys. And even though they had this toxic relationship, I just feel so terrible for him in that moment. And I apologize, I'm getting emotional, I know. I just feel so terrible for him in that moment that he cannot let her go. And he carries her with him, and he carries the weight of her death, literally. Then finally, he lays her down in a public place so that Aiko can be found, before he himself also lays down in a field. I have still not emotionally recovered from these moments, even these few months later. And I don't think I've ever had a series impact me that way before. I'm a huge fan of Berserk. I mean, obviously. And even the emotional, devastating stuff with that, like, I feel it, and I feel it hard for about a week, and then I move on and accept it for what it is. But with this one, it just was too real. And I've seen so many YouTubers have the video tagline like, "I can't recommend this manga, the manga that everyone has warned you about," and stuff like that. And that is fine, because it's true. I cannot recommend this manga to people, especially if I know that they are not mentally able to handle it. And now, while I was barely mentally able to handle it, I do at the same time feel that it is a manga that anyone who is a fan of seinen, that anyone who is a fan of emotional depth in their literature, in their media, should experience firsthand. I have one more relationship I'm going to speak on briefly, and that is Sachi, who I had mentioned earlier when talking about Punpun's landlord. The relationship with Sachi and Punpun is very different than your typical romantic relationship. They both love each other dearly. In some respects, they're more friends than lovers, but at other times, they're more lovers than friends. And I think it's kind of telling that Sachi never wanted to save Punpun, and Punpun wanted to save Aiko, and Aiko wanted Punpun to save her before realizing that he couldn't, and took her own life while she was happy, right? But Sachi does save Punpun. She becomes that person for Punpun, and in a way, her daughter becomes that person for Punpun. And oh my god, stop crying, Lucas. Her daughter becomes that person for Punpun. As we see in his final monologue to Aiko, she has saved him, right? Her and his friends, Mimiko, who calls him Ono D, like I mentioned earlier, and so many other relationships that I didn't touch on in this video because I wanted to focus more on the parts that hit me harder. But I think nothing hit me more than seeing our little bird boy at the end of the manga waving, happy with his friends. And it's because of Sachi, right? Because she didn't give up on him. When he disappeared with Aiko, no one else went looking for him. It was her. Even though he had let her down, he promised he was going to go with her to take care of the baby that she was about to have and didn't want. She decides to keep it, but still, she knows something's wrong with Punpun, and she does not give up until she finds him. And it's so beautiful. And as I said, her daughter, in his final monologue, him saying, she calls me dad, and I think that this child should have a dad, but I don't know if it's me. If that's not the most realistic thought process of any father, whether they be a stepfather, a biological father, or an adoptive father, I don't know what is. Oh man, Oh, dude, I knew I was going to get emotional. I did not know I was going to cry to that part. I knew Aiko probably this, no. In closing, I left the title of this video as I cannot review this manga because I cannot. And for once, I fully meant what I said in the title for this video. I cannot review Osayumi Punpun or Goodnight Punpun because it's not one that needs it. It is a series that needs to be experienced. Sharing your thoughts on it in an analytical sense, to me, doesn't make sense because it invokes such prime emotion from a person. It reflects people in such a very serious way, whether that be Punpun's loneliness, or the way that he copes with his parents' relationship, or the way that he sees the world, or the way that he sees himself. It is all a feeling that you connect with or you don't. So reviewing it would not satiate how I feel about this series. And I think the best way to explain that is by a quote from Punpun himself. Trying to put such fragmented and vague feelings into words is almost impossible. So do I recommend Punpun? Yes, I do. I think that you should enjoy this series if you are emotionally strong enough to. If you are going through depression or feeling like giving up, this is not a series I can recommend to read in that moment. But I think that once you get through that, which you will, that is the time to read this. Now, it left me in a bit of a darker mindset than I was when I started it, but after many months now of reflecting and going over the series in my mind and how it made me feel and how it related to me, sometimes in its worst moments, I feel like I've come out a better person and understanding that I wasn't alone in feeling the way that I felt, and not only that, but in experiencing those life moments that I related to within Punpun. Now, of course, I did not relate to him when he was at his worst. I don't think anyone should, and if you did, please go to therapy. Sorry. But, of course, like I said, as a child of divorce, that first part really did a number on me, and his relationship with Aiko also really did a number on me. But yeah, I know that today's video was a little bit of downbeat, and I have not yet got my setup completely set back up, so I appreciate you guys watching all the way through to the end if you did. Also, I know I was kind of all over the place with this one, but I wanted to share how I felt about Punpun, and I didn't know how to approach it. Like I said, this was a hard one to talk about, guys, just because of the subject matter. But yeah, I hope you did enjoy the video. If this is your first time watching, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That's a big one. I'm trying to hit 500 subs right now, and we are over halfway there. But more importantly than anything else that I've said in this video, I want you to have a wonderful, wonderful night.